Get on your knees and apologize, you gutter girl, now." The plate had already shattered across the marble floor, and the whole dining room went dead silent. 30 guests, forks frozen halfway to open mouths, and down on her knees, gathering the broken pieces with her bare hands, was a 23-year-old maid named Ada Bennett. But nobody in that grand room was looking at the broken china anymore. They were looking at the richest man in the state, a billionaire who had never once raised his voice in public, gripping the edge of that long table so hard his knuckles had gone white. His eyes were fixed on one small thing, a cheap little tortoise pendant hanging at the maid's throat, and his hands were shaking. Nobody in that room knew what was coming. "But you are about to. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me tell you how a girl they called Nobody turned out to be the one thing that powerful man had spent 25 years searching for. To understand the ending, you have to understand the suffering, and Ada Bennett had suffered more by the age of 23 than most people do in a lifetime. She had not always cleaned other people's floors. There was a time, a short, bright, far-away time, when she sat in the front row of a public high school on the east side of the city, and her name was read first at every awards assembly. Highest marks in her grade, 2 years running. Her teachers used to call her counselor, half as a joke and half because of the way she could stand up in a debate and take an argument apart, calm and clear, never raising her voice, never once backing down. She had wanted to be a lawyer. She had the mind for it, everyone said so. What she did not have was money. And money, in this world, is the wall that stands between a poor child and almost everything she was born to become. The first crack in Ada's life came when she was 15. Her little brother Caleb was 9, a boy with a gap in his front teeth and a laugh that could fill a whole apartment. One winter he caught what the family thought was just a bad cold. It settled in his chest. It got worse. By the time their mother carried him into the county emergency room, his lips had gone a color no mother should ever have to see. They stabilized him. They gave the family a sheet of paper with a number on it, a number for the specialist, the tests, the procedure he needed, and that number might as well have been the price of the moon. The Bennetts did not have it. They did not have anything close to it. Ada's mother, Grace, sold what little they owned. She begged, she borrowed. She worked double shifts cleaning office buildings at night and came home with swollen feet and empty hands. And while the grown-ups argued with insurance lines and payment plans, a 9-year-old boy with a gap in his teeth quietly ran out of time. Caleb died on a Tuesday morning in a hospital hallway, waiting for a bed that a richer family would have been given an hour after walking in. Ada was the one holding his hand. She never forgot the lesson the world taught her that morning, and it was not a lesson about medicine. It was this: in this country, there are 2 kinds of sick people, the kind that money saves and the kind that money lets go. And Caleb had been the second kind only because of an accident of birth he never asked for. So when, 8 years later, Ada's mother started coughing, really coughing, the kind that bends a body in half and brings up something that should never be coughed up, Ada did not hesitate. She did not pray about it. She did not wait and hope. She folded her own dream up small, the way you fold a letter you cannot bear to read again, and she put it somewhere deep inside her chest, and she went looking for work that paid enough to keep her mother on the right side of that terrible line. She would not bury another person she loved over a number on a piece of paper, not if there was breath in her body to prevent it. That is how Ada Bennett came to be standing at the wrought iron gate of the Calloway estate at 6:47 on a cold, gray morning, 2 years before the night of the broken plate, holding a single duffel bag that contained everything she owned in the world. The house did not look real. It sat on a hill above the city behind walls so long they seemed to belong to a small nation, white stone climbing into the sky, a gate of black iron that swung open on its own, soundless, as though the house itself had decided to allow her in. A row of cars in the circular drive, each one worth more than every apartment on Ada's old street put together. She stood there and felt small, the way the ocean makes you feel small. A part of her wanted to turn around and walk back down that hill and never look up at it again. But her mother was waiting in a one-room rental with a cough that would not leave, and Ada Bennett had already learned the hardest arithmetic there is. The kind where you subtract your own dreams so that someone you love can keep on living. So she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked through that gate. The woman who hired her was the head housekeeper, a tired, gray-haired woman named Mrs. Foster, who had worked inside those walls for 30 years. She looked Ada up and down once, sighed the sigh of someone who had seen too much, and said words that Ada would carry for a long time. "Honey, you're too smart and too pretty for this work, and I can see both from here. That's not a blessing in this house. That's your problem. In a place like this, the ones who shine are the ones who suffer most. So if you're wise, you'll keep your head down, do your work, take your pay, and make sure nobody ever remembers your face. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," Ada said. She did not yet understand. She would. The master of the house was a man named Henry Calloway, and everyone simply called him Mr. Calloway, the way you'd say the name of weather. He was in his late 50s, with gray coming hard into his beard, and a stillness about him that made even loud men lower their voices when he entered a room. He had built Calloway Holdings out of a single hardware store he'd bought at 24 with borrowed money, and turned it into one of the largest companies in the state. People said he was hard as iron across a negotiating table. But inside his own home, he moved like a man carrying something heavy that nobody else could see. He rarely smiled. He never spoke of his past, and in his study, on the corner of a desk the size of a rowboat, there sat a single photograph in a silver frame, turned at an angle so that only he could see it properly. Nobody was allowed to touch that photograph. In Ada's first week, not knowing any better, she reached out to dust it. Mrs. Foster caught her wrist so fast it frightened her. "Never," the old woman whispered. "Not that one. The last girl who touched it. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He just told her to pack her things and go that same afternoon. So never. You understand me? Never." Ada never touched it again. But sometimes, late, when she was sent in to clean the study, she would find Mr. Calloway sitting in the dark in front of that photograph, perfectly still, just looking at it. And she would wonder, quietly, who on earth could have put that much sorrow into the face of a man who owned everything a person could own. And then there was Victoria. Victoria Calloway was the daughter of Mr. Calloway's late brother. Her parents had died in an accident when she was a little girl, and Henry, who had no children of his own that anyone knew of, had taken her in and raised her like the heir to a throne. Heir was the right word, because Victoria had decided, somewhere very early in her gilded life, that the entire world had been built to be a footstool beneath her feet. She was 26, beautiful in the cold way of a person who has never in her life been told no, and she had already made up her mind that Calloway Holdings would belong to her the day the old man died. From the very first morning, Victoria looked at Ada and saw a threat she could not name, and she handled that threat the only way she had ever learned how, with cruelty. "What's your name again?" Victoria asked, the first week, swirling a glass of something pale. "Ada, Ada." She rolled it on her tongue, like she was tasting something gone bad. Big name for such a small little nobody. "Did you know it's an old name? It means noble. Imagine that. A noble girl scrubbing my toilets." And she laughed, and her friends laughed. And Ada said nothing. The cruelty came every single day, and Victoria was clever enough never to repeat herself. When Ada served dinner, Victoria would set down her fork and announce that the girl's hands smelled of bleach, and it was ruining her appetite. When Ada wore her one good dress to church on a Sunday, Victoria asked, loudly, in front of company, whether the staff was stealing now, because surely a maid couldn't afford to look like that on her own. When Ada swept the long stone veranda, Victoria stood in the doorway and said, "You sweep like a person who's never once owned anything worth keeping clean." "You poor people are getting awfully bold these days," she said one afternoon, watching Ada polish the banister of the great staircase. "When my grandmother ran this house, a maid knew her place. She didn't look you in the eye, she didn't have opinions, but you carry your head like you're somebody. Let me give you some advice, free of charge. A girl ought to know her level before she lifts her eyes to a Calloway. You'll be cleaning floors when you're old and gray. That's just what was written for people like you." Ada finished the banister. She did not cry where Victoria could see, She had a rule about that. She would cry at night, in the narrow servants' room off the back kitchen, with her face pressed into a thin pillow, so that no one in that enormous house could hear her. And in the morning, her eyes would be clear, and she would go back to work. That was how she survived. One day at a time, one swallowed insult at a time. And nearly every dollar she earned went straight home, to the rent, and to the medicine that kept her mother breathing on the right side of that line. Now, here is a true thing about what happens to a person who is treated as less than human for a long time. It is not what most people imagine. People imagine that you grow bitter, that hatred fills you up like water filling a jar. But that is not what happened to Ada. What happened was quieter, and stranger, and far sadder. She grew smaller. She learned to take up less space, to make less sound, to need less, to want less, until one day, she caught her own reflection in the glass of Mr. Calloway's display cabinet and did not recognize the bent, careful, invisible young woman looking back at her. The girl who had once stood at the front of a classroom and argued like a born attorney was still in there somewhere, but Ada had learned to fold that girl up and hide her away, the same way she'd folded up her brother's memory, the same way her mother had folded up the truth about a man she would not name. Because in that house, a girl who held her head up was a girl asking for trouble. And yet, there were small mercies. There always are, even in the hardest places. There was Mrs. Foster, who would sometimes leave an extra portion on Ada's plate and pretend it was a kitchen mistake. There were the Sunday mornings, the one half-day Ada had to herself, when she would take 2 city buses across town to the little rented room where her mother lived and sit and hold her hand and listen to that terrible cough and tell her, every single week, the same gentle lie, that the work was fine, that the people were kind, that she was happy. Because Grace Bennett had given everything she had for her daughter, twice over, and the least that daughter could do was let her believe the sacrifice had landed somewhere soft. "You're too thin," her mother would say every Sunday, peering at her over her glasses. "Are they feeding you up in that big house?" "They feed me just fine, Mama. Stop your worrying. Worry's bad for your chest." "And the family, they treat you with respect? Like one of their own?" "Like one of their own, Mama." And Ada would smile, and Grace, who had spent her own whole life smiling lies for love, would choose to believe it, because believing it was the only thing that let her sleep. Sometimes on those Sunday afternoons, they would sit quietly together, and neither of them would say Caleb's name out loud. But it was there in the room with them, always, in the empty space where a grown young man should have been sitting. And Ada would look at her mother's tired face and make herself the same silent promise she made every week. "Not you too. I will not lose you the same way. Not over money. Not while I can still work." That was the rhythm of Ada's life for 2 long years, suffering in the daylight, smallness in the evening, and 1 half-day a week of pretending, for her mother's sake, to be someone whose life had not been quietly stolen from her. She did not complain. She did not break. She simply endured, slow and patient, carrying her whole house on her back, like the little carved tortoise she wore at her throat, and never, ever took off. There was exactly one person in that mansion who treated Ada like a human being, and it was the last person on earth she would have expected. It was Mr. Calloway himself. She noticed it first in small things. He began to say good morning to her, and rich men do not, as a rule, say good morning to the staff. When she brought his coffee, he would ask in that low, quiet voice how she was doing. And then, this was the strange part, he would actually wait for the answer, as though it mattered. One evening he found her eating alone in the back kitchen, a small plain plate of rice and beans, because she sent her grocery money home. He said nothing in the moment. But the next morning Mrs. Foster told her, looking thoroughly confused, that Mr. Calloway had left a standing instruction. The girl Ada was to eat full meals from the family kitchen, every day, and there was to be no argument about it. Ada did not understand it. She was grateful, but she did not understand it. And neither did Victoria, who watched the old man's strange softness toward a maid with eyes that grew colder by the week. What Ada did not know, what nobody in that whole house knew, was the thing Henry Calloway saw every single time he looked at her. He saw the necklace, a thin, worn chain with a small pendant shaped like a tortoise, the kind of thing a roadside craftsman might carve. Nothing valuable, nothing a thief would ever look at twice. Ada never took it off. Her mother had given it to her when she was a little girl and had pressed it into her hand with a strange fierceness. "This came from your father," Grace had said. "Whatever happens in this life, you do not lose it. It is the only thing he ever gave you. And one day, you hear me, one day it might just give you back something you lost." Ada had never met her father. Grace would never speak of him. The only story Ada had ever been given was that he was a wicked man from a rich family who had thrown the two of them away, and that was the end of it. The first time Henry Calloway saw that little tortoise pendant around the neck of his new maid, something happened in his chest that he could not explain to himself, because he had seen that pendant before. He had held its twin in his own hand 25 years earlier, on the worst night of his life. But he told himself it was a coincidence. The world is full of cheap carved trinkets. He was an old man getting sentimental and foolish, and so he said nothing. He watched, he waited, and he suffered in silence, the way he had spent a quarter of a century teaching himself to suffer. Which brings us, at last, back to the night of the broken plate. It was Victoria's birthday. The house was full of important people, the kind who own newspapers and sit on boards and decide the futures of cities over dinner. And Victoria was at the center of all of it, glowing, the queen of the evening. Ada had been on her feet since 5 o'clock that morning. By the time she carried the heavy tray of fine china into the dining room, her hands were not entirely her own anymore. The edge of the carpet caught her foot. The plate slipped. And that is where we began. On her knees, a thin line of red on her thumb, 30 pairs of eyes, and Victoria rising from her chair to perform the humiliation she had been waiting 2 years to perform, in front of an audience finally worth performing for. "Get on your knees and apologize, you gutter girl. Now, in front of everyone, or have you forgotten what you are?" Ada looked up, and for one single second, before she lowered her eyes again, she saw something that none of the 30 guests noticed. She saw Henry Calloway gripping the edge of the table, his eyes fixed not on his niece, not on the broken china, but on the small tortoise at her throat. His hands were shaking. "That," said a voice, "is enough." It was not loud, but it stopped the room the way thunder stops a room. Henry Calloway had risen from his seat at the head of the table. "Uncle," Victoria began. "I said enough, Victoria." He came around the table slowly. An old lion that everyone in that room had quietly forgotten was still a lion. And then, in front of 30 of the most powerful people in the state, the billionaire Henry Calloway lowered himself down onto his own marble floor and took the broken pieces of china out of Ada's bleeding hands. "Get up off this floor, sweetheart," he said softly. Ada was so stunned she barely heard the word he used, but Victoria heard it. "You are not the one who should be kneeling tonight," he said. "Uncle, you're embarrassing me, in front of everyone, over a maid." The old man stood back up. He looked around the glittering room, at his guests, at his niece, at all of it, and when he finally spoke, his voice was tired, in a way that frightened people far more than anger would have. "In this house," he said, "we have forgotten how to see people. I have forgotten it too, for a long, long time, but not tonight." He turned to Ada. "Go see to your hand, and then go and rest. The plates can wait." He never saw the look that crossed Victoria's face as Ada left the room. But Ada saw it, and she knew, with the certainty of a girl who has been hunted before, that something was coming for her. She was right. Victoria did not sleep that night. She sat at the window of her enormous bedroom, watching the lights of the city below, and she made a decision. The old man was getting soft, and a soft old man could change his will. A soft old man could decide that a kind, hard-working maid deserved more than the niece who had only ever taken from him. Victoria had seen smaller threats grow into disasters. This one had to be removed, cleanly, completely, in a way that could never be undone. And she knew exactly who to call. His name was Gregory Marsh, and he had been the Calloway family attorney for 15 years, which meant he knew where every skeleton in that family was buried. including a few he had helped to bury himself. He was a smooth man, the kind who smiled with his mouth and calculated with his eyes. And for the past 3 years he had been quietly moving money out of Calloway Holdings through a web of paper companies that only he and Victoria knew anything about. They were bound together by money and by guilt, which, if you want to know, is the strongest rope there is. "The girl's a problem," Victoria told him on the phone. "My uncle's attached to her. I want her gone. Not just out of the house, gone. In a way, nobody will ever take her seriously again. Disgraced. Finished." Gregory Marsh was quiet for a moment. "And what do I get out of it?" "You get to keep your freedom, Gregory. Because if my uncle ever decides to bring in outside auditors to look over the company before he rewrites that will, what do you suppose they'll find in those accounts you've been managing so creatively?" The attorney understood at once. "A theft," he said slowly. "If the girl is caught stealing, even Henry Calloway can't defend a thief. It's clean, it's simple. People believe it about the help, because they want to believe it." "Exactly," said Victoria. "Make it something valuable. Something that can't be explained away." 3 days later, the late Eleanor Calloway's diamond ring, a family heirloom worth more than Ada would earn in 20 lifetimes, vanished from the safe in the master bedroom. And the search that followed, conducted by Victoria herself, with great public concern and many false tears, led directly to a small wooden box beneath Ada's bed in the servants' quarters, where the ring was found, wrapped neatly in one of Ada's own headscarves. The way it unfolded was a small masterpiece of cruelty. Victoria did not simply accuse, she performed. She first let it be quietly known to 2 or 3 of the staff that something precious had gone missing from the family's jewelry. She let the worry spread on its own, the way a bad smell spreads through a house, until everyone was looking sideways at everyone else. And then, at the dinner hour, when the whole household was gathered and could serve as her audience, she suggested, with enormous reluctance and a handkerchief pressed to a perfectly dry eye, that perhaps, painful as it was, they ought to search the staff rooms, just to clear everyone's name, just to be fair. "I don't want to do this," she said. "I love everyone in this house, but my grandmother's ring is sacred to this family, and if one of us has taken it, hiding it only makes the sin worse. So let's search. Whoever's innocent has nothing to fear." And of course, when they reached Ada's tiny room, when Victoria herself knelt and reached under the bed with the easy confidence of someone who knew precisely where to reach, there the ring was, wrapped in Ada's own scarf, as though the girl had been foolish enough to hide a fortune in the most obvious place in her own room, and then gone right on serving dinner as if nothing had happened. It made no sense. A thinking person could see in a single moment that it made no sense. But that is the terrible genius of an accusation against the poor. People do not stop to ask whether it makes sense. They have already decided, long before any ring is found, that a maid is the kind of person who steals, and so the planted ring is not evidence to them at all. It is merely confirmation of a thing they were always ready to believe. "I knew it," Victoria said, holding the ring up high so the whole gathered household could see, her voice breaking with rehearsed sorrow. "I knew it the day she walked in. We took her in. We fed her. We gave her a roof over her head. And this is how she repays this family, by stealing from the dead." "I did not take it," Ada said. Her voice did not shake, but it was very quiet, the quiet of a person who has just felt the floor open up beneath her. "I have never seen that ring before in my life. I did not put it there. Somebody put it there." "Of course that's what you'd say." Victoria turned to the gathered staff, playing them like an instrument. "You've all seen it with your own eyes. The ring was in her room, in her own scarf. What more do you people need? A confession? Thieves don't confess. They lie, the way she's lying to your faces right now." Ada looked around the circle of faces she had worked beside for 2 years. The cook, the groundskeeper, the driver, Mrs. Foster. And she saw the thing that broke her more than the accusation itself. She saw doubt. Not in all of them, but in enough. She saw people she had served and laughed with and covered for slowly begin to look at her the way you look at a stranger who might be dangerous. 2 years of quiet decency, and it had taken Victoria 90 seconds to wash it all away, because a planted ring weighs more in people's minds than 1,000 small kindnesses. Only one person spoke. Mrs. Foster, the old housekeeper who had warned Ada on her very first day that the ones who shine suffer most, stepped forward, her voice trembling but certain. "In 30 years in this house," she said, "I have never once known this girl to take so much as a slice of bread that wasn't hers. I don't believe it. I won't believe it." "Then you're a foolish old woman," Victoria snapped. "And maybe we ought to search your room too." And Mrs. Foster fell silent, because she was old and poor, and she too could be put out into the night with a single word. And Ada watched her fall silent, and did not blame her even a little. Because that is what poverty does. It teaches even the kindest among us that there is a limit to how much truth a person can afford to tell. "Call the police," Victoria said to the room. "Let them take her. A thief belongs in a cell, not in a Calloway house." And here is where this story could have ended, the way these stories usually end for poor girls, with a squad car, and a closed case, and a life destroyed by a lie that everyone was only too happy to believe. But it did not end there, because of two things Victoria had not counted on. The first thing Victoria had not counted on was a young man named Daniel Reed. Daniel was Mr. Calloway's godson, the only child of Henry's closest friend, a man who had died years before. Henry had helped raise Daniel right alongside Victoria, but where Victoria had grown cold and grasping, Daniel had grown into something rare among young men with money in their pockets. He was decent. He worked in the company, not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand it, and he treated the drivers and the cooks and the cleaners exactly the way he treated board members and investors, which is to say, like people. He had been away on business for 2 months, and he walked through the front door of that house on the very afternoon of the accusation, just in time to see Ada standing in the center of a ring of accusers, with her hands shaking and a wooden box at her feet. "Wait," Daniel said. "Everybody wait, before anybody calls anybody. I have one question." He looked at the box, at the ring in Victoria's hand, at Victoria's triumphant face, and his eyes narrowed in the way of a man who has just noticed something. "Where exactly is this ring supposed to have come from?" "From Uncle's bedroom safe," Victoria said. "Obviously. The safe with the combination that only 3 people in this house know. You, me, and your uncle." Daniel let that hang in the air. "The safe that sits directly in the line of sight of a security camera. A camera that records to a server I set up myself." The room went very still. "So," Daniel went on, slowly, "if Ada opened that safe, took that ring, and carried it down to her room, then we have it on video. We don't need to guess. We don't need to accuse anybody. We can just watch." For 1/2 of 1 second, Victoria's face did something it had never done in public before. It slipped. The cameras have been down for weeks," she said quickly. "Everybody knows that." "Do they?" said Daniel. "Then let's go pull the footage right now and see exactly how down they are." But before he could take a single step toward the study, the old man, who had been standing silent in the doorway listening to every word of it, made a sound. A short, sharp sound. His hand went to his chest. And then the most powerful man in the state folded slowly to the floor of his own front hall. And the household that had been so eager, 1 minute earlier, to destroy a maid, suddenly had a much larger emergency on its hands. "Uncle!" Victoria screamed, and this time, for once, the fear in her voice was real, because a dead Henry Calloway could not protect her either. "Call 911! Daniel was already on his knees beside the old man. "Now, move." And in the chaos that followed, the shouting, the running, the rising wail of an ambulance climbing the hill, one small thing happened that nobody noticed. Nobody but Ada. As the paramedics lifted Henry Calloway onto the stretcher, his eyes opened, and they found her face in the crowd, and his hand, weak as a child's now, lifted off the stretcher and reached toward her, toward the small tortoise pendant at her throat. His lips moved. No sound came out. But Ada, who could read a person's face the way her old teachers used to praise her for reading a case, saw the shape of the word he was trying to say. It looked like a name. It looked like the name Grace. Her mother's name. They rushed Henry Calloway to the best private hospital in the city, and for a while the question of the ring was forgotten inside the much bigger question of whether the old man would live at all. But Victoria did not forget. The moment the immediate danger passed, the moment the doctors said he was stable but needed rest, she moved to finish what she had started. He collapsed because of the stress that girl brought into this house, she told the staff. And to her satisfaction, some of them believed her. Because fear makes people believe the loudest voice in the room. I want her gone, tonight. I don't care about the police anymore. I just want her out of my sight. Throw her bag out at the gate. And so Ada Bennett, who had given 2 years of her life to that house, who had never stolen anything but a few minutes of crying time at night, was put out at the iron gate, in the dark, with a single duffel bag, accused of a theft she did not commit, with no job, a sick mother, a rent she could no longer pay, and the cold lesson of her dead brother sitting like a stone in her chest. She stood outside the gate she had been so afraid to walk through 2 years before, and now she was just as afraid to walk away from it. She had every reason in the world to turn her back on the Calloway family and never look up that hill again. They had used her, insulted her, and finally framed her. Any reasonable person would have spat at that gate and gone home. But Ada kept thinking about the old man reaching for her necklace, about the shape her mother's name had made on his lips, about the fact that, of every single person in that golden house, the only one who had ever knelt on the floor for her was now lying in a hospital bed, possibly dying, surrounded by people who saw him as nothing but a will waiting to be read. And so she did a thing that Victoria, who measured everyone by the size of her own heart, could never in 1,000 years have predicted. She did not go home. She went to the hospital. She had no money for a cab, so she walked, and then she rode 2 city buses across the dark city, and she arrived at the gleaming hospital, looking exactly like the thing they had called her, a poor girl in a cheap coat, and security would not let her in. So she waited. She sat on the cold curb outside that hospital all night long, through the chill, through the mosquitoes near the parking lot lights, through the suspicious eyes of a night guard who twice told her to move along, and each time she moved just far enough to satisfy him, and then quietly came back. She had nothing to gain by being there, no job to protect, no inheritance to chase, no audience to impress. She did not even know yet what that old man was to her. She only knew that a powerful man had once knelt down on a hard floor for her, and that the world had taught her this is the single rarest thing a powerful person ever does, and that a debt like that is not paid by walking away when the man is dying. In the gray light of morning, Daniel came out for air, exhausted, unshaven, his tie pulled loose, and he found her there on the curb. "Ada? What in the world? They told me you left." "They put me out," she said simply. "But I wanted to know if he's all right. That's all. I'm not here for anything. I'll go, as soon as you tell me. Is Mr. Calloway all right?" Daniel looked at this girl, who had every reason on earth to curse his family, and who had instead slept on a curb to ask after a sick old man. And something in the way he understood the world shifted a little. "Come inside," he said. "Come see for yourself." The old man was awake, weak, hooked to a row of soft beeping machines, but awake. And when Ada stepped into the room, the change in his face was so sudden and so complete that Daniel noticed it too. Henry Calloway's eyes filled with tears. "You came," he whispered. "Even after what they did to you, you came." "You knelt for me, sir," Ada said. "Nobody ever knelt for me before in my whole life. I couldn't just walk away from that." And so began the strangest 2 weeks of Ada Bennett's life. She stayed at the hospital, not as staff, she had no job, but simply because the old man did not want her to leave, and because somebody needed to actually care for him, instead of merely waiting for him to die. Victoria visited once a day, for 15 minutes, checking her phone the whole time, talking about company business the old man was too tired to follow, then leaving as fast as she had come. But Ada was there for the long hours. She learned how he liked his coffee. She read to him from the newspaper. She noticed when he was in pain before he said a word, and called the nurse before he had to ask. "You watch people," the old man said to her one evening, surprising her. "You see what they need before they say it. That's a rare thing. Where did you learn it?" From being invisible, sir, Ada said, and then was embarrassed by her own honesty. When nobody looks at you, you've got plenty of time to look at everybody else. You learn to read faces. It's about the only book the poor are allowed to read for free. The old man was quiet for a long while after that. Tell me something, he said at last. In my house, the hours you worked. When did you get up? 5, sir. Sometimes before. And when did you go to bed? When the last person in the house was settled. 11, midnight, on party nights. His jaw tightened. And did anybody ever tell you that even the help is owed rest? That there are rules now, real rules, about hours, and fair pay, and how a person who works inside your home has to be treated like a human being? Rules like that are for people the law remembers, sir, Ada said, without any bitterness, simply stating a thing she had long ago accepted as true. The law forgets people like me, or rather, people like me can't afford to remind it. To file a complaint, you need a day off, and money for the bus, and the nerve to make an enemy of the hand that feeds your sick mother. So we keep quiet. We manage. She paused. That word, sir, managing, that's the whole life of the poor in a single word. Henry Calloway looked at this stranger who had slept on a curb for him, and he felt something he had not felt in a great many years. Shame. Not the small, sharp shame of being caught in an error. The deep, slow shame of a man who realizes that all the comfort he has lived inside was built, in 100 invisible ways, on the backs of people exactly like her. Managing. You said you wanted to be a lawyer, he said. Ada's hand went still on the coffee cup. Once. Why did you stop? Because my brother died, sir. The words came out flat and careful, the way you carry something that will spill if your hand shakes. He was 9. He got sick, and we couldn't pay for what would have saved him. I held his hand in a hospital hallway while richer people walked past us to their rooms. And a few years after that, my mother started coughing the same kind of cough, and I made up my mind I would not bury another person I loved over a number on a piece of paper. So I folded the dream up and put it away, and I went and found work that paid enough to keep her alive. She set the cup down very carefully. Education's the one road out of poverty that nobody can ever steal back from you once you've walked it, sir. But it's also the road they make the most expensive on purpose, because the people at the top understand exactly what an educated poor person becomes. Dangerous. So they price the road out of our reach, and then they call us lazy for never walking it. The old man did not answer her. But that night, after she had gone to rest, Henry Calloway lay awake in his hospital bed for a long, long time, turning her words over and over. And somewhere in the dark of it, a decision began to take shape in him, a decision that would change both their lives. It was during those hospital weeks that Ada and Daniel truly came to know one another, and it happened the way real things happen, slowly, in small moments, with no drums and no lightning. He brought her sandwiches from the cafeteria and discovered she had once been the brightest student in her school. She mended a torn cuff on his shirt with 3 quick stitches, and he watched her hands and forgot entirely what he had been saying. They played a foolish card game at 2 o'clock in the morning, while the old man slept, and she beat him 5 hands in a row. And when she laughed, really laughed, for the first time since he had known her, Daniel realized he had been waiting 2 whole weeks just to hear that sound. "Can I ask you something?" he said one night. 2 years. How did everybody in that house walk past you every single day for 2 years and never once see what you are? Because they weren't looking for a person, Ada said. They were looking for a function, a pair of hands. When you decide ahead of time that someone is beneath you, your eyes obey the decision. You stop seeing them. It wasn't that they couldn't see me, Daniel. It's that they'd already agreed not to. He never forgot that sentence. None of us should. But while kindness was quietly growing in that hospital room, something else was growing too. The old man, lying in his bed with nothing to do but think, kept looking at the little tortoise around Ada's neck. And finally, one afternoon, he could not bear it a moment longer. "That necklace," he said. "Where did you get it?" "My mother gave it to me, sir. She said it came from my father. I never met him. She said he was a rich man who threw us away." Ada touched the small carved tortoise without thinking. "It's the only thing I have from him. She made me promise never to lose it. She said one day it might give me back something I lost. Henry Calloway's hands began to shake. Your mother, he said. What is your mother's name? Grace, sir. Grace Bennett. The room went so silent that Ada could hear the machines counting out the old man's heartbeats, and she watched those numbers climb on the monitor as something broke open across his face. Grace, he whispered. Grace Bennett, who used to work in the house of Eleanor Calloway. My mother. Ada's own heart had begun to pound. How do you know that? The old man reached out, and with trembling fingers, he opened the small locket at the end of his watch chain, a thing she had never once seen him open. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph. A young woman, beautiful, laughing, and around that young woman's neck, plain as day, hung a small carved tortoise, the twin of the one Ada wore. Because, the old man said, and his voice broke completely, I am the rich man who threw you away. Except I did not throw you away, child. I swear it before God, I lost you. They took you from me, and I have spent 25 years searching for the two of you, and I had given up. I had truly, finally given up. And then one cold morning, a maid walked into my dining room, wearing the very necklace I gave to the only woman I ever loved. Now you have to understand what really happened, because the truth was crueler and kinder than anyone in that house had ever imagined. 25 years before, Henry Calloway had not yet been a billionaire, or anybody's Mr. Calloway. He had been a young man working in his mother's businesses, and in his mother's grand house, there had worked a young housekeeper named Grace, gentle and clever and proud, and young Henry had fallen in love with her completely. He had given her a small carved tortoise, the old symbol of patience, of endurance, of a creature that survives anything by carrying its whole home on its back and refusing to quit, and he had promised to marry her, money or no money, family or no family. But his mother, the formidable Eleanor Calloway, had found out, and Eleanor Calloway would sooner have died than let a housekeeper carry the family name. While Henry was away on a business trip his mother had deliberately arranged, the old woman discovered that Grace was carrying a child, and she acted with the cold efficiency of the very rich. She had Grace put out into the night, with a sum of money pressed into her hand, and a single threat she would never forget, that if Grace ever came near Henry again, if she ever breathed a word to him about the baby, the Calloway family had the money and the reach to make certain that she and her child would not be safe. Not anywhere. Not ever. People with that kind of money could ruin a poor girl with a phone call in those days. They could make sure she never worked again, never found a roof, never got a fair hearing in any room that mattered. Grace believed the threat completely, because she had seen exactly what that family was capable of. So Grace, a poor, pregnant girl, alone against a fortress of money, did the only thing a mother in her position could do. She ran. She disappeared into the vast ocean of the city. She changed everything but her own two hands, raised her daughter alone in poverty, and never told the child the truth, because the truth, she believed, was a danger she could not afford to hand her own little girl. She told her only that her father was a wicked rich man, because a hated father is far easier to grow up without than a beloved one who was stolen away by force. And she kept the necklace, and one day she gave it to her daughter, and she planted in that child the single seed of hope she dared to plant, that one day this small tortoise might find its way back to the man who carved its meaning into her heart, and that he might, somehow, recognize his own. Grace went on to try to build a life. Years later, she had a second child, a little boy named Caleb, with a gap in his teeth and a laugh that filled a room, by a kind man who did not stay. And then she lost that boy too, the way the poor lose so much, to a number on a piece of paper. When Henry Calloway came home from that long-ago business trip and found Grace gone, his mother told him the girl had taken the money and run off with another man. He did not fully believe it, but he could find no trace of her, search as he might, and over the long years, the lie hardened into a wound he finally stopped probing. He never married. He never had another child that he knew of. He took in his late brother's daughter, Victoria, and he built his empire. And the photograph on his desk that no one was ever allowed to touch was a young housekeeper named Grace, laughing, with a small tortoise around her neck. His mother died without ever once confessing what she had done, And he had given up all hope until a girl with that very same necklace knelt down on his dining room floor. "You are my daughter," Henry Calloway said, weeping in his hospital bed, holding the hand of the maid his own household had called a thief and a nobody. "You've been cleaning my floors. My own child has been scrubbing my floors, eating in the back kitchen, sleeping in the servants' room, while I sat up in that big house mourning her. God forgive me. God forgive my mother." His voice cracked apart. "Your mother named you Ada. Do you know what that name means? It means noble. She named you the truth of what you are, and then she spent her whole life hiding you in plain sight to keep you safe. Do you see now? Do you see the kind of love your mother was carrying all this time?" Ada could not speak. 23 years of being nobody's anything, of being a function and not a person, of swallowing insults and crying into a thin pillow, of holding her brother's hand in a cold hallway and her mother's hand on 100 Sunday afternoons. All of it collapsed inside her at once, and the only thing she could do was hold the old man's hand and let the tears come. When she could finally speak again, what she said was not what either of them expected. "All those mornings," she whispered, "when you said good morning to me, when you told them to feed me from the family kitchen, when you knelt on the floor and took the broken plate out of my hands." She looked at him. "You didn't know. You're telling me you didn't know I was your daughter, and you still did all of that, for a maid you thought was a stranger." "I didn't know it here," the old man said, touching his head, "but I think something in me knew it here." He touched his chest. "A man doesn't choose who his heart reaches for, Ada. Mine had been reaching for you and your mother for 25 years in the dark, with no name to call out. When you walked into my dining room, my heart found something it had been hunting for half my life, and my stubborn old head spent 2 years arguing with it." He shook his head. "I was kind to you because some part of me already loved you, and I was too proud and too broken to stop and ask myself why." And in that hospital room, the daughter who had been raised to believe her father was a wicked man, and the father who had been told his love had abandoned him, sat together in the wreckage of one cruel woman's choices and began, slowly, to forgive the years they had lost. It would take a long time. 25 years is not undone in an afternoon, but it began there, with 2 people holding hands and a small carved tortoise between them that had, against every odd in this world, kept its ancient promise at last. It had given back what was lost. But there was no time yet for the long, gentle reunion they both deserved, because 2 things now had to happen, and they had to happen fast. The first was the truth about the ring. The second was the truth about the money, and both of them led to the very same door. When Henry Calloway was strong enough to come home, he came home changed. He came home with a daughter beside him and a cold fury in his heart. And he came home with one quiet instruction for Daniel: pull the camera footage from the night the ring went missing, and bring in outside auditors, independent ones, to go over every account in Calloway Holdings, going back 5 years. Victoria heard about the auditors and felt the first chew cold of fear move through her, because she understood at once that the game had changed, and she did not yet know how badly. She tried to fight. When Henry gathered the household and the board to reveal that Ada was his own daughter, Victoria laughed in the man's face. "This is madness," she said. "A sick, confused old man takes in a maid with a cheap necklace and a clever story, and suddenly she's the heir? Uncle, she's manipulated you. She saw a weak old man and she played you like a fiddle. There's no proof. A necklace is not proof. Anybody can buy a necklace." "You're right," said Henry Calloway calmly. "A necklace is not proof, which is exactly why I did this." And he handed her a single sheet of paper. It was a report from a registered medical laboratory, a DNA test, taken in those days at the hospital, signed and stamped and sealed, and it stated, in language no clever tongue on earth could argue its way around, that the probability that Henry Calloway was the father of Ada Bennett was greater than 99.9%. The paper trembled in Victoria's hand. "I didn't need the necklace," Henry said quietly. "The necklace only told me where to look. Science told me the rest. She is my blood. She is my daughter. And there is no power on this earth, including you, that is going to take her from me a second time. It might have ended there. A reunion and a furious niece sent away. But Henry Calloway was not a man to leave a wound half cleaned, because while the DNA was being settled, Daniel had done the other thing. He had pulled the camera footage. And on the night the family and the full board gathered to hear the final truth, with Gregory Marsh sitting smooth and confident in his fine gray suit, Daniel stood up and played the recording on the large screen in the old man's study. The footage was perfectly clear. The cameras had never once been down. The screen showed the master bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. It showed the safe, and it showed, plain as daylight, Victoria Calloway keying in the combination, lifting her grandmother's diamond ring out of the safe, and handing it to Gregory Marsh, who carried it out of the frame, in the direction of the servants' quarters. The room did not breathe. "You'll say it was edited," Daniel said evenly. "So I've already handed the original file, with its unbroken digital timestamp, to an independent forensic firm. Their report is in the folder in front of every board member at this table. The recording is genuine. There is no edit. There is only the two of you, planting a ring in an innocent girl's room, to destroy her life." But the old man was not finished. And what came next was the blow that truly ended Victoria. Because greed, you should know, is a deeper sin than cruelty. "The auditors finished their review this morning," Henry Calloway said. He did not raise his voice. He never had to. "Over the past 3 years, a sum of $4.5 million has been moved out of Calloway Holdings through a network of 7 companies that exist only on paper. Companies created, signed, and controlled by my family attorney, Gregory Marsh, with the knowledge and the signature of my niece, Victoria Calloway." He let the number sit in the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. "That is not cruelty to a maid," he said. "That is theft from a company that puts food on the table for 4,000 families. That is a crime, and unlike the lie you told about my daughter, this one has your real signatures on it." Gregory Marsh was already on his feet, already reaching for the door. But the door opened before he got to it, and 2 officers stepped through. Behind them came a third man, calm, in a plain dark suit, who introduced himself as a special agent with the Financial Crimes Division of the Bureau. What followed was not dramatic in the way Victoria might once have imagined drama. There was no screaming, no curse, no grand villain's speech. There was only paperwork, and the quiet click of handcuffs, and the small, terrible sound of a proud woman's whole world ending without a sound. Victoria Calloway and Gregory Marsh were arrested that night and charged with conspiracy, forgery, embezzlement, and the filing of a false report of a crime, which, under the law, is itself a serious offense. As they led her past Ada, Victoria stopped. For the first time in 2 years, she looked at the maid as an equal, because they were equals now, 2 women standing in a great house, except one had built her life on kindness, and one had built hers on cruelty. And the law had finally weighed the difference between the two. 2 years, Victoria said, and there was wonder in her voice, and something almost like grief. 2 years. I made your life miserable, and you slept on a curb in the cold to ask if the old man was still breathing. She shook her head slowly. I never had a chance against you, did I? I was fighting you with money. You were fighting with something I never had. And then she was gone. Now here is the part of the story that matters most, and it is the part that most stories get wrong. You might expect that Ada, the wronged maid, now revealed as the billionaire's only child and rightful heir, would take her seat on the throne, put on the fine clothes, give orders to the very people who had once tormented her, live in glorious, golden revenge for the rest of her days. She did not. A week after the arrests, when the house had finally gone quiet, and the news cameras had at last left the front gate, the old man called Ada and Daniel into his study. He had the papers drawn up. He was an old man who had very nearly died, and he had only one child in all the world, and he wanted to give her everything, the whole of Calloway Holdings, the houses, the cars, the empire, all of it. He held out the pen. Ada did not take it. "Daddy," she said, and she had only just begun to call him that, and the word still felt enormous in her mouth. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Because you taught me something, without ever meaning to. You taught me that the worst thing you can do to a person is decide who they are without ever once asking them. The old man slowly set the pen down. For 23 years, Ada said, other people decided who I was. To Victoria, I was gutter. To the household, I was a pair of hands. To the whole world, I was a maid, a thief, a nobody. And now you want to make me something else, an heiress, a princess, the owner of all of this. And Daddy, I love you for it. With my whole heart, I love you for it. But don't you see, it's the same thing. It's one more person deciding who Ada is, and handing it to her. I do not want to be handed a life, not even a golden one. I have never once, in my whole life, been allowed to build something with my own two hands and call it mine. Then what do you want? The old man asked, and there was no anger in it, only a father, trying, for the very first time, to truly see his child. I want to go back to school, Ada said. I was going to be a lawyer once, the best in my grade. I folded that dream up and put it away to keep my mother alive, and I have carried it folded up in my chest ever since. I want to unfold it. I want to earn my own name, not Calloway, not Princess. Ada Bennett, who studied, who worked, who became something because she chose it. She reached across the desk and took his hand. Pay my tuition, Daddy, if you want to give me something. Bring my mother home and put her in a good hospital, a real one, the kind that doesn't let a person go over a number on a page. Let me have my family back. That's all I'm asking for. She smiled, and it was the very same smile Daniel had fallen for in a hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning. The empire can wait until I've earned the right to deserve it, if I ever do. The old man looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he did something he had not done in 25 years. He laughed, a real laugh, full and free, and there were tears in it. Your mother, he said almost exactly those words to me, the day I tried to give her everything I had. She said a gift is not the same thing as a life. I didn't understand her then. He wiped his eyes. I think I'm only understanding it now. From her daughter, 25 years too late. He held her hand a little tighter. Go to school, Ada. Become the finest lawyer in this state. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, all of this will still be right here waiting. Not because I handed it to you, but because you'll have earned the wisdom to carry it. They brought Grace Bennett home that very same week. The reunion of those two, the man who had loved her and lost her, and the woman who had protected their daughter at the cost of her own entire life, is a story too large to fit at the end of this one. So I will only tell you this much. They put Grace in the best hospital in the city, and that cough, the one everyone had spent 2 years treating like a death sentence, turned out to be something treatable, something that money had simply never let her afford to treat. The same way money had never let her afford to save a little boy named Caleb, years before, in a county hallway. And so Grace lived. She lived to see her daughter call Henry Calloway Daddy. She lived to sit in a sunlit room and tell that old man, at last, the whole truth of the years he had missed. And on the day the doctors finally said she was well, Grace Bennett took off her old worn coat and put on a fine new one, not because she had become rich, but because, for the first time in 25 years, she was no longer afraid. But before any of that, on her first night home, with the whole reunited family gathered, Grace asked them all to sit, and she said a name out loud that the family had been too gentle to say. Caleb. And she told them about the boy with the gap in his teeth, and the laugh that filled a room. And the table wept for a child, none of them but Grace and Ada had ever met, and Henry Calloway, who had the money to have saved 1,000 boys like Caleb, and never once thought to look, bowed his gray head, and grieved a grandson he would never meet. It was Ada who finally spoke. He should not have died, she said. Not him, and not anybody's child, over a number on a page. When I become a lawyer, Daddy, that is the kind of fight I want. Not the empire. That. And the old man nodded, because he finally understood what his daughter was made of, and it was not gold. Ada went back to school. She studied law, and she was, as anyone who had ever sat in a classroom beside her could have told you, brilliant. She paid her own way as far as her father would allow, working evenings in the company's legal office, learning the empire she had refused from the very bottom up, which was the only way she had ever known how to learn anything worth knowing. And in time, she and Daniel married, quietly, with Grace Bennett in the front row, and the old man weeping openly and entirely unashamed. And the diamond ring, the one that had nearly destroyed her, the heirloom that had belonged to the very grandmother who had once thrown her mother out into the night. That ring, Henry Calloway had melted down. He used the gold to make two small things, a new little tortoise for Grace, that might have been the love he lost, and found again at last, as a friend, and a second little tortoise for his daughter, to replace the cheap, worn chain she had worn through all her long years of suffering. But Ada refused to wear the new one. She kept the old, cheap, hand-carved tortoise around her neck for the rest of her life. "This one found me when I had nothing," she would say, touching it. "This one knew exactly who I was when even I had forgotten. I'm not about to trade the thing that saved me for a prettier thing, now that I'm safe. That is not how you treat what's been loyal to you." And that, my friends, is the end of the story of the maid they called a thief and a nobody, who turned out to be the daughter of a king, and who then chose to become something harder and far better than any princess. She chose to become herself. Now, let me tell you why I wanted to share this particular story, because I've been turning it over in my own mind for a good while. In my own life, I have watched the way people treat those they've quietly decided are beneath them. I've seen the security guard greeted like a piece of furniture. I've heard the cleaning woman spoken to like a tool that happens to breathe. I have watched well-dressed people in warm rooms decide, in the space of a single glance, that the person serving them isn't really a person at all, just a function, a pair of hands, a uniform. And every single time, I have wondered the same thing the old man learned far too late. What if you are wrong about who that person is? What if the one you are stepping over is carrying something, a brilliance, a sorrow, a whole hidden nobility, that you will never get to see, because you decided in advance not to look? The truth that this story dresses up in diamonds and DNA is, in the end, a very ordinary truth, and you do not need a billionaire for a father for it to be true about you. Every maid is somebody's noble child. Every cleaner, every driver, every so-called nobody you have ever been tempted to look straight through is the hero of a story every bit as large and every bit as full of love and loss as your own. The Calloway family did not lose their dignity the day Victoria was led away in handcuffs. They lost it years before that. On every ordinary morning they walked past a kind, clever, suffering girl and decided she was not worth seeing. The lesson is not that the poor girl turned out to be secretly rich. The lesson is that she was always worth treating with dignity. On the very first day, at the gate, when she was nothing but a frightened young woman with a single bag, long before anybody knew a thing about a necklace. If you only learn to respect people once you discover they're secretly important, then you haven't learned respect at all. You've only learned to be afraid of important people. Real respect is the kind you give the maid while you still believe she is only a maid. So the next time life sets a so-called nobody in front of you, I hope you'll remember Ada. I hope you'll look at the person, and not the uniform, because you never, ever truly know who is wearing it. If this story moved you, do me one small kindness. Sometime today, go and be gentle to one person the world has taught you to overlook. That is the only thank you I'll ever ask for. Until next time, take care of yourself, and take care of the people the world forgets.